Okay, so here I am in the Willamette-Valley on my first stop. Perhaps I should... hello, everyone. I'm in the Willamette-Valley at Adelsheim Vineyards. I'm here with David Adelsheim. Is it Adelsheim or Adelsheim?
It's Adelsheim.
Adelsheim?
Yeah.
All right, see, I'm learning already about Oregon Pinots. And David's going to talk a little bit about, I just was asking him about how his take on Oregon being much more low-key than California. So I'm going to turn it over here to David Adelsheim. I'm so glad I asked, so now in the future when I'm pouring that wine for clients, I can get it right. So David, just on the way over here, I passed a street called Why Worry Lane.
It's like the perfect microcosm, that it's a block away, if you will. There isn't really a block there, from several of the more important wineries in Oregon, if you will, not just us, but Bergstrom and others that are up the street. And it's kind of the perfect microcosm of what Oregon wine industry is about, which is that in the 60s and 70s and 80s, it was superimposed over rural Oregon, which had really been in decline economically for some time. As after World War II, the rural world of Oregon didn't find anything in particular that it could hang its hat on. It slowly has declined, along with timber, and it's one of the reasons why agriculture is just barely eking out its first place in the Oregon economy over tourism. Obviously, tourism has taken the place of much of what else goes on in Oregon. But Why Worry Lane is some locals that have horses and have put that little fake street name.
So that's a fake name?
Yes.
I see. Well, they're clearly not worried about getting caught or upsetting the authorities.
It's illegal to put up your own street name if you've got a driveway and you want to name it.
Right.
But is the Oregon wine industry more low-key than the California wine industry? Well, I actually have a lot of connection to the California wine industry since my significant other spent many years as the president of Bouchain and Vinecliff and worked at other wineries as well. And historically, we've spent a lot of time back and forth in Napa and in Sonoma County, Russian River in particular, where she had her own brand of Pinot. And I don't know that I would have come to that as the most significant difference, although it's probably a piece of it. Probably, I think Oregon is a little less about tooting one's own horn.
Right, and more about
maybe that's what you were getting at with that.
Right. Well, I think also to me, it just it's struck me just everything in Oregon to me seems more low key. The speed limits are lower. People drive more slowly. I mean, I was following someone in Newburgh who was driving the speed limit, and it was 25 miles per hour, and there was not another car on the road.
It's because you often see 5 cop cars in a row.
Well, I did. I saw 2 people getting pulled over on the way over here, and I just thought, oh my goodness, this is, it's different.
God, that's just a terrible picture. Just terrible. I don't know that it's
these are obviously superficial examples, but maybe
yes, but the ones you're going away with.
Well, maybe for viewers, maybe what do you think, just off the cuff, are the kind of the top 3 maybe takeaways you'd like me and readers to take away from my trip?
Well, about the Oregon wine industry, I'm not going to talk about the entire universe. Kind of
I appreciate that for the sake of the brevity of this video.
Right. Well, it's only 3, so
Yeah.
I think the place where I was going is the Oregon wine industry has been forced to be very collaborative. And that's not to say that the Napa Valley Vintners aren't collaborative or Sonoma County people, whatever. But I think to an even greater extent, Oregon has been forced into this, partly because the origin of the industry in the 60s and 70s was so without money. I mean, it was founded by people with typically no farming background whatsoever, no land holding. I mean, none of the vineyards were planted on sites that were owned by somebody prior to being purchased to be put into vineyard. And so there isn't old wealth. that is involved in farming that slowly got moved into grape growing, like there is
Sure.
in Washington, for instance. There isn't, there aren't the large tracts of land like there are in California, the old Spanish land grants. Oregon, the Willamette-Valley was subdivided in the 1840s and 50s when the U.S. government was, in essence, enticing Americans to come to Oregon by giving away free land. So instead of having a gold rush, we had a free land giveaway.
I see.
But the free land was 80 or 160 acres max, and in order to qualify, you had to clear 5 acres and live here 5 years, and then on that lot, and then you could be granted that. But what it's meant is that there are a lot of small farms, both because of the finance issue and because there weren't large plots, and also wineries, almost all of which were founded by people who had done something else prior or had been educated in something else prior. Some of that is not unlike the California industry, which obviously really came into what we would recognize today as the California wine industry at about the same time, in the late 60s after Mondavi founded his winery. But the difference was that it was in California, it was overlaying on a place that had grown grapes for 100 years or so.
Right.
Whereas Oregon was starting something literally from scratch with no history of that other than sort of something that you could read about in books.
Right.
And I think with all these people that had not much money, starting an industry in a place that nobody knew could grow grapes, and in the case of us in the Willamette Valley, focusing on a grape variety, which in the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, nobody had ever heard of. The only way we could ever get a message out would be to work together, to go to New York together, to show our wines together,
I see.
to create events that would bring people to Oregon, and basically to have a fundamental ethos of collaboration. And I think that when people come to Oregon, I suspect that by the time you leave here, even though you're not getting the collaborative insight because you're seeing one winery at a time, I'm betting that by the time you leave, you feel that wineries are referring to each other and talking proudly about each other, and obviously are not just touting their own wares, but really talking about the state and the Willamette Valley and their sub-AVAs, if you will.
Right.
The things that are sort of the collaborative.
Right. Absolutely. That's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing.